I've always wanted a natural wood coffee table in my living room, but they can be really expensive, so I decided to make my own. I found a really nice slab of oak on eBay, which I paid $70 including shipping. All the other parts came from Lowe's hardware store, but you can get them from just about any local hardware retailer. This is a list of the tools that I use. You could probably get away with using just basic tools like a screwdriver, but I do recommend using a drill and an 1/8" bit so that you can drill pilot holes for any mounting screws. First thing I did was prepare the board. I wanted to remove some of the soft, punky wood along the edges, so I used my Dremel with a flap sander. You don't have to be really precise here. You just want to make sure you can get rid of any of the wood that might get knocked out later on. Like I said, you don't want to be too precise here, otherwise you'll spoil the character of the wood. I used my electric palm sander with some 80 grit paper to get the surface of the wood smooth. I also use it along the edge. And then after I'm done with the 80 grit, I'll switch to 150 and then I'll finish with 220 grit sandpaper. After finishing with the 220, I could have started applying the finish, but I decided to take it a step further. I purchased some small squares of Mirka Goldflex sanding paper, which is foam-backed paper. It applies a really nice smooth finish. I began with 400 grit and then switched to 600 and then finished off with an 800 grit. This produces a super smooth surface. Along the way, I discovered there were some cracks on the edge that had me a little worried, so I flooded them with some water-thin super glue and then used a pipe clamp to clamp them up. With all the sanding out of the way, I began applying 2 coats of Watco Danish oil. I really like Danish oil because it's a mix of varnish and stain. After the Danish oil had dried overnight, I began applying the first of 3 coats of Minwax Wipe-On Poly. Wipe-On Poly makes for a beautiful finish. You can add 3 or more coats, and each coat you add will increase the luster of the finish. While the polyurethane was drying, I went ahead and began applying coats of flat black spray paint to my Waddell table legs. Next, I positioned the top plates for mounting the table legs. I wanted to install these close to the edge, but not so close that the mounting screws might pop through the beveled edge. I then pre-drilled the holes for the screws that would hold the top plates so that it wouldn't crack the oak. After installing the legs, I noticed that because the back of the board isn't flat, 2 of the legs appeared to be leaning inward. So I went ahead and used a couple of washers to shim the top plate mounts. That way, when I install the legs, they'd appear straight. Next, I screwed on the table legs, making sure that I didn't over-tighten them. Sticky back felt pads are used to protect the floors. Looks pretty good for a 3-day project that cost under $120 to make.